Alright, when we left off last time, we had created a pop-up statement, and then we had copy and pasted it into another notepad file and created a human algorithm out of it. It's the only 5 steps here, and now it's time to move these 5 steps into 5 different steps on our flowchart. So in order to do that, we have to click the arrow between beginning and end. And since number 1 has an equal sign, it is an assignment. And then we configure it. It'll be configured the same as this number 1 up here. And that is, I have a place in memory called rate, and I want to assign to that the number 5. Alright, well that finishes the first one. Number 2 is an input. So again, I click and then I use input. Input has 2 parts to it. The first part is where we're going to store the information, and since we use num dogs, we'll use it again, num, and then we'll use the camel methodology and have a capital D. And down the prompt, we have to ask it a question, and that question has to go in quotes. Say, how many dogs? Okay, we have to make sure that it starts and ends with a quote at all times. So if that question mark was outside, it would be wrong. Alright, we're going to go ahead now and do number 3. That is another input. Okay, again, we do our third one here and use the more. Okay, so I'm going to call this one num hours. And I'm just going to simply down here ask the question, how many hours? Question mark. Close the quote. Okay, and then I'm going to do this, and since number 4 has an equal sign in it, that means it's an assignment. Okay, and this one is final charges, and again I'm going to use final and then capital C for charges. Okay, and now I'm going to have to do the right side, and the important thing to remember is that the right side always comes from places in memory we've already declared. So we want to take our time and say, okay, well, num dogs has to be the same as this num dogs. So one thing I can do is, well, I have to type it, so num capital D-O-G-S times, and the next one is num hours. And that's NUMHRS, and I'm going to multiply that by the rate that we have right here. Alright, so that should work. Okay, our final one is output, so we'll use an output symbol. Okay, on this one, we're going to say that the final charges are, and they're going to put a space and then close that quotation. Okay, we want to join it, and the join symbol is a plus sign with a place in memory that has the final charge, and of course that's just down here, so it's final and then charges, final charges. Okay, so we have a text string here joined by whatever in a place in memory. If we wanted to, we could actually put a $sign here, make it look pretty. Alright, so now the only way we know if this is going to work is simply by coming up here to the run button and pressing it. Okay, if I have 10 dogs and I walked them for 10 hours, then $500. So it's 10 times 10 times 5. So 10 times 10 is 100. 5 times 100 is 500. And we know this is working. Alright, so now that that is done, now we simply move this over here. I open up my HTML kit and we simply code it. So as I've done in the past, we're going to hit the JavaScript button, and then the first thing I need is my place in memory, and I get that simply from any input and any assignment. So I have var. The first thing I have is rate, comma, num, and a capital D for dogs, comma, num hours, comma, final charges. Okay, and we're done. Now, if I showed you last time that I would copy and paste from here into that, but that takes a long time, and I only have so many minutes to make a video, so I'm going to forego that. But really, if you copied and pasted, you can make sure that you aren't going to make any typos. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is my assignment, and that is I have a place in memory called rate. I want to assign to that place in memory the number 5, and I'm done. So I put a semicolon in. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and put some input, and the first input I have is I have a place in memory called num dogs. I want to assign to that place in memory what's returned when I use a prompt, and I ask the question, how many dogs? Question mark, close quote, close parenthesis, and a semicolon. We're done. Again, yesterday I showed you how you can copy and paste it from the left side to the right side, but again, for time, I'm going to go without a net. But I recommend you at home to do copying and pasting, because as I mentioned, copying and pasting is your friends. So I have a place in memory called num hours. I'm going to assign to that place in memory what's returned when I take a prompt, and the question I want to ask is how many hours? Question mark, close quote, close parenthesis, and semicolon. Okay, now I'm going to do my calculations. And my only calculation I have is I have a place in memory called final charges. Again, that's the same as right here. So if I use final charge instead of final charges, I'd be in trouble. I'm going to say I want to assign to that place in memory what's returned when I take what's ever in num dogs, multiply it by whatever's in num hours, and multiply that by the rate, and then semicolon, because I'm done. Okay, and then I have my output. And remember we use the document object, and that is a web page. And I use a dot and type in the word write, because that's a method that will put all the information inside the parentheses on a web page. And I'm going to say, in quotes, the final charges are $, and then I'm going to close that quote. I'm going to use the plus sign for joining, and then I want to see what's inside final charges. Charles, final charges. Okay, and then I'll go ahead and do a semicolon because I'm ending that line, and we are done. Alright, so proof of the pudding's in the tasting, so let's go ahead and run it. Alright, so I need the run button. Okay, and I'll hit the preview button. And it says line 12. I was expecting a parenthesis. So let's see what that's all about. Okay, and it was. I have a parenthesis here, but I'm missing a parenthesis there. And those are the good errors. The errors that give you a gray box. Okay, so the first number is 10 dogs, 10 hours, and if we look at our document right, the final charges are 500. Sweet, we are done.